So welcome to Ancient Geeks, a podcast with two or maybe even more geeks of a certain age this episode. We were geeks before it was chic, and we're throwing the normal format out the window because we have guests today. Just to first explain what we're going to be doing today, this episode is about the weird. And when we were putting together topics for this podcast, Stephen and I knew that we needed to do an episode about the weird 1970s, where there were a lot of people, myself included, who were interested in Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, ancient astronauts, psychic phenomena, ghosts, conspiracies, the Bermuda Triangle, Atlantis, demonic possession, and so much more. So while Stephen and I can talk about our early interest in the weird when we were young, we also knew that there were minds greater than our own who study this in greater breadth and depth than we have. And it took us about 5 seconds to determine that the right people to call on would be our guests today, the hosts of Monster Talk, Blake Smith and Karen Stolznow. So
Hello.
welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us here.
Welcome
I don't know about being experts, though.
Well, I mean, you've done
we are.
You've done breadth and depth. I mean, you've done
Yes.
practically everything I just mentioned and deep dives on all of it.
Yeah, I think we're just fascinated by these topics, like many people, and we do research. And I don't think you can be an expert on this, though. I think it's just we're hobbyists, aren't we? Like,
I never feel like I've gotten to the depth that I want to. So yeah, I guess I forever questing for an understanding. So
But
Yeah.
that's a sign of wisdom, Blake, when you realize you don't know what you don't know.
yeah. Well, then I must be super wise because I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Well, like tangible evidence of UFOs, it's just out of reach. Just out of
Yeah,
reach. It's
exactly.
Always.
Okay. All right. So the Monster Talk podcast, as I just said, is an institution. I mean, it's been around for 16 years now.
Ooh, it's been a minute. Yeah, yeah. Isn't that crazy, Karen? I mean, like, just,
Yeah. Well,
wow.
yeah. I think we thought we were around 10 years, and then we announced that, and then we're corrected. It was like 8 or 9 years, and so ever since then, it's always been 10 years for me. But no, it's probably 15.
Yeah,
16
I'm
years
sure
now.
we've crossed. Yeah, it was 2009 that we got started.
Isn't your anniversary in July, is what I
Yeah.
saw.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Congratulations.
so
Wow.
wild. Yeah.
That's amazing.
It just creeps up. And now we're on a weekly format, and that's WEEK.
And EA.
Yeah, a little bit of that too. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're always looking for new content. I mean, the thing is, we're using monsters as a springboard to talk about critical thinking and scientific topics, and
Mhm.
it's a bottomless well. I mean, just monsters have always been a part of human culture. So you can find lots and lots of ways to bring them in and talk about these topics to a lot of depth. And
Right.
we've had a lot of academics on, and I know we've had it. I think we've explored and expanded what constitutes a monster quite a bit. And we're now also doing monster adjacent and cultural studies and that sort of thing. But yeah,
Anything we're
always,
interested in.
yeah, basically anything we're interested in, but always framed with a sort of skeptical outlook and trying to get as much science and logic and critical thinking in there as we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what really caught me, as a regular listener, was the scientific perspective on what would be cool if it were real,
Yeah.
but
But,
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't, so as you may or may not know, so Tom and I both have backgrounds. We're both PhDs in political science. And Tom did not go the academic route. I recently retired from academia. So I think we appreciate your studied scientific approach to the subject matter, even if the subject matter is fantastical. And it also makes for a great intersection with a lot of the pop culture stuff that we've been looking at. And I've been appreciative and interested in the way in which you've talked about the way in which a lot of this monster talk really grows out of pop culture and is reflected in pop culture and is reflected back into the broader culture. I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a podcast about origin stories, both Stephen and I have this long discussion about origins with geek culture in general when it was still fresh and new, and kind of the individual franchises like Star Wars, Star Trek, comic
Haven't
books,
heard
and so
of
forth.
those. Is
I know they're really obscure. Yes. All the things that we had a hard time explaining to our peers, like why we were so enthusiastic about it when we were very young. But here, we want to kind of dive into what got us interested in whatever it was, that yeah, in the realm of the weird that captured our interests. And so I wanted to, if you don't mind, for both of you to kind of give your origin stories, like what got you into the realm of the weird? What was your gateway drug? Was it ghosts or UFOs or whatever? So if that's okay, Blake, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, okay. For me, it was the library. So when I got into elementary school, the library there had a really robust collection of ghosts, UFOs, and Bigfoot material. And those were books that I really hadn't read before, but I was an avid reader. So being able to check out books on Bigfoot and UFOs and ghosts really got me started. And then, as I'm sure we'll discuss in this interview, the 1970s were this really rich moment in history when just a whole lot of nonsense was making it to the airwaves in ways that it really hadn't before. It was really kind of the birth of paranormal television, and there were a few TV specials that kind of lent to that. But um, besides the books, I would say running into In Search Of was another big vector.
Mhm.
And I'm sure there's other things, but In Search Of and library books were really my gateway.
Okay, how about you, Karen?
Oh, I'd have to say it's pretty much the same things as Blake. I was maybe about 5 years old, and my brother is a little bit older than me, and he had some friends around, and they were talking about a ghost that they'd seen, and I was just hooked immediately. I don't know if I believed in it or not, but I was certainly really enticed by just the idea of seeing a ghost. And so, like Blake, I went to the library and picked up a bunch of books. My brother had some books at home too that he'd won for a school competition, and they were Usborne or Usborne books. We've
Thank
heard
you.
both
Yep.
pronunciations, and they covered a lot of these classic ghost stories that go back about a century or more. Stories like the tale of Borley Rectory and Jeff the Talking Mongoose, and
Yeah.
a story
Yep.
about Lord Dufferin's ghost. And so that's really what brought Blake and I together, was that even though we came from other sides of the earth, we had this similar love and passion for these topics, and had heard of these classic stories that, while a lot of people know about them, a lot of people don't. So that really brought us together, and certainly In Search Of too. That was some bonding time between myself and my brother. And so he would be going out for the night drinking with his friends, but that was a little bit of time where he would watch these stories on there, and Ripley's Believe It or Not too.
Thank
And
you. Yep.
yeah, and
Yes.
I heard about all of these stories again and again, and other tales like the Winchester Mystery House and Coral Castle, and stories about vampires and werewolves and all kinds of folklore and beliefs. And but I think ghosts are probably my true passion, and that's really
Mhm.
how that was my gateway drug into all of this.
And you've written about ghosts or people's ghost encounters.
I have, yes. I mean, since I was 5, I used to write stories about a ghost called Zuz. And that was a very ghostly sounding name to me. And I haven't really stopped. I write short stories, but also write a lot from a kind of cultural, linguistic, folkloric perspective too.
All right, Stephen, how about you?
Oh, well, so I think, like Blake, I think, in fact, I sort of surmise we may be roughly the same age, that we were elementary school age in the 1970s. Um, you know, I was exposed to things like the $6 Million Man and the Sasquatch episodes. I remember sort of in the zeitgeist, and not so much seeing it, but the zeitgeist of seeing commercial on TV about the Sasquatch, the Legend of the Bigfoot movie, or I remember a friend telling me it's a weird, very distinct memory of the Boggy Creek Monster, and it was almost like, well, that's got to be real because it's got a very specific name to it, right? Or at least maybe it's real. I've never been like super obsessed with all this, but it's really, I think, part of a broader cultural experience from the 1970s. And I think one of the things that interested me about this conversation and about a lot of things that I've heard on your podcast and that we've been dealing with is just really examining the way in which all this culture became so prevalent at this moment in time, and how it really sort of suffuses so much of what we've experienced. So that's kind of my backstory. And of course, obviously, things like UFOs are fascinating because I like science fiction. And I think most of my experience though was through pop culture more than reading about it. I was a library kid, but not for those kinds of books necessarily.
Yeah.
Tom, how about you?
So for me, I mean, I was also predisposed. I was an astronomy kid. I watched Star Trek. When a TV show came out with Leonard Nimoy as the host, I had to watch that. And so In Search of was definitely an entry point for me as well. I also like, remember there were scholastic books
Oh
that
yeah.
you could buy, that were about UFOs or monsters or whatever. They really, I mean, it is like we're really describing how saturated with the weirdness this period was.
I should have name dropped Daniel Cohen because I think, yeah, he was a real gateway drug as well.
Yeah. There were also like lots of cheap paperbacks about these topics that were really available then, and I picked some of those up. And like my personal experience was I was a kid in San Diego, and I went with my mom to the Whaley House, the
Mm.
most haunted house in San Diego. And now whenever I see a sign like that, you've so acclimated me to hear the cash register sound effect. Anytime somebody claims it's the most haunted, there's certainly a
Exit through
commercial
the gift
interest in
shop.
play.
Yep, yep.
Exactly.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
Of
Well,
course.
the
they're
gift
all the
shop
most haunted.
the gun shop was closed. I was kind of disappointed. Anyway, I was back there the last week actually, just by chance, and kind of walking through there and thinking that I had hit a cold spot, but it probably was just a breeze from somebody opening the front door. Anyway, so that all kind of then pushed me in this direction, and there was so much to dip into. I mean, there were magazines, there were documentaries, there were TV shows. There was just we'll talk about all of that in a moment. That was kind of my origin story. So so In Search of, I mean, we all of us talked about In Search of. Why was it so big an impact on our brains, do you think?
It's a good question. Excuse me, I'm gonna cough. I don't know. We've been doing this. My podcasting company is Monster House, and so with Karen, we're focusing on monsters. And I have a friend who's an archaeologist named Jeb Card, and we're doing a walkthrough of In Search of. And so it's been really interesting to go back and see these episodes after all these years because what I remember is Bigfoot and ghosts and all this sort of supernatural stuff. But there's actually a pretty good chunk of it that's things like weather is scary. The earth is scary.
Yes.
Earthquakes are scary. Like there's a whole lot of like real and this guy was really bad and this guy was terrible. Like there's a lot of true crime and weather and the earth is trying to kill us content. But all I really remember was ghosts and monsters, and that's what really captured my imagination. And it's there.
Hmm.
But I think by season 4, you're kind of done with most of the monsters. I think up through season 6, there's some ghost photography stuff,
Mm.
but it really hit that sweet spot when you're a kid of this is a documentary. It had the feel of a documentary, and it felt like somebody was taking these topics seriously, and they were covering things like. Is there life after death? Can people be frozen and come back to life? There's a lot of real good sci-fi content in there, or that sort of fodder for that kind of material. And it was just there was nothing quite like it. And Alan Landsberg was the producer, and the origin of that series is kind of interesting because it came out of a few. Well, I guess it started with Von Daniken. They
Mm.
did there had been a movie version of Chariots of the Gods made for Germany, and they bought the rights to release it in America, had Rod Serling narrate it, and they kind of cut it up and changed the original documentary. And they aired that, and it became kind of a hit. And then they did a few more specials like that. And then they're like, I think we got a series here. Unfortunately, Rod Serling passed away. So they used Leonard Nimoy instead, but he basically brought that Mr. Spock gravitas to the material. So whatever was going on in an episode, I think Leonard Nimoy as the narrator and presenter kind of just automatically captured my attention as a Star Trek nerd and just a fan of this material. But I think maybe that's kind of the core of it. Is you've got a guy who you know as Mr. Spock coming on and talking about psychics and can plants talk, and is there really a Bigfoot? Is there a Yeti? These really important scientific questions, and he was giving it the kind of depth and anchoring it in that sort of seriousness that only Mr. Spock could. That's my take on it.
Yeah. What about you, Karen? What grabbed you about In Search of when you first saw it?
Well, let's be honest. It's really Leonard Nimoy's suits. His safari suit,
The big lapels,
and his polo necks, or as we would call in Australia growing up, his skivvies for a polo neck. But I think it was really, I was so young when that came out, and already I think the show was old. So I really only saw the tail end of the 70s, and I think it was just the possibility that these things could be real. And this show was the first of its kind. This was before shows like The Extraordinary and The Unexplained. We had our own Australian version, and I just think, all told, even the music was creepy, and the images from Nosferatu at the start, it just really brought together a lot of creepy concepts and ideas and things that were exciting, especially to kids. I don't think I ever watched an episode with my parents at all. In fact, I don't think I knew of any adults who watched it. It really did seem to be a show that kids were watching. And I felt like there was some kind of wiggle room there for you to make up your own mind as to whether these things were real or not. And you see that later on with James Randi's TV show, where he presents the evidence and will say, well, I'll leave it up to you. So it just felt like just the possibility of these things was very exciting. And it just made growing up in Australia, where things just seemed very, very dull, a lot more exciting. And maybe in these other countries too, in America or in the United Kingdom, these things might be real. But just day to day growing up in Sydney, everything just seemed just very, very simple, very real. And that was just another side to reality that I looked forward to exploring when I became older.
Yeah. When we did the monster movie episode recently, Stephen and I talked about just the underlying theme that the world is a bigger place with a lot more unknowns in it, that who knows what's out there, and I think what you're saying, Karen, is basically the same thing about maybe there is a Loch Ness Monster. Maybe there is life after death. Who knows? We'll investigate. We'll ask the questions here on In Search of. What about you, Stephen?
Exactly.
So as I had to confess to you previously, I did not watch In Search of, and how I did not fall, into the thrall of Leonard Nimoy at that age of my life, I do not know.
Okay, at this point, I got to say it again because it's a thing every episode. You're dead to me now.
I know, it's terrible.
Okay.
I do remember being on. I also remember another show, just again to hit the theme, called That's Incredible.
Oh yeah.
So
Which both of those are Alan Landsberg. So
that's okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember those kinds of stories. I know none of them stuck with me enough to comment on now, but I do remember all that kind of, mysterious, maybe this is real, maybe it's not kind of stuff. I felt very tabloidy to me, especially That's Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Not surprising.
No.
Yeah. What about go ahead.
I was going to say I just happened to get this book, Weirdnumentary.
Oh, look at that!
Like a couple of days ago. The entire book is 1970s TV shows and specials tied in exactly into this material. This is such a good book. I'm going to see.
Amazing.
Get the host or the author right there. But they did a picture. Can you see? This is
we can see it
for podcasting. Right. There's an episode of In Search of called Haunted Castles. And there's a moment when this monster ghost comes out. And I have to say, it's ridiculous. It's like grease paint, makeup. But you can't rewind in the 1970s. You're just stuck with whatever.
Right.
sears into your memory in that moment. And that ghost appearing haunted me for decades. And when I finally went back and looked at it and could pause, I was like, oh my God, this is like some drama student wearing just like 3.5 pounds of grease paint. It's just, it's really not that scary, but
You think about how small the TVs were. It
yeah,
was low def and the whole
yeah,
thing. And you're right. You can't rewind. You can't pause.
yeah.
Black
No,
and
you're,
white sometimes.
yeah. And
Yes.
also the limited number of channels we had available
Yes. Oh,
meant
yes.
that anytime somebody covered something like this, the reach of that material was so much larger than you could ever get today. It just you just would never have those kind of cultural touchstones. And Search of moved around. It was very much a syndicated show. So in any
Right.
market, it might be appearing on different days of the week at different times. So when I met Karen and we both, the fact that she knew who Jeff the Talking Mongoose was so stunning to me. I don't really think I'd
Immediate
ever met
connection.
another grown person. I just, it was, that's it's a deep cut from the monster world. But I guess the people in our generation, um, we had, we were limited in what we could get. It's like if
Right.
you were fascinated by this stuff, the number of respectable sources for material was really limited. So in search of really kind of cut through all that and got this content out to a broader audience.
Tom and I have talked quite a bit, especially we talked about our childhood, which is if you liked something, you would watch anything about that thing. It
Yes.
didn't matter how silly it was. Like we were talking about the Donnie Marie Star Wars special and the Star Wars holiday special a couple of weeks ago, those kinds of things. You just get so locked in because your choices were so limited.
The Hanna-Barbera Godzilla cartoon.
Yep. Yep.
Nobody liked Godzuki, but
No, they did not.
Yeah.
you had to deal with it, right?
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
we also did the DC sort of variety show. There were two variety shows of DC superheroes.
Oh,
Yes,
it's
there
just-
were.
That
Yeah.
was excruciating to
Yeah.
watch. Oh my God. But it was the kind of thing that you'd watch when you were a kid. What about like printed material? Was there any like magazines or books that kind of stand out from your early history? You mentioned Usborne.
Mhm.
Karen, you might have more exposure to this. I was we didn't really cover it, but I grew up with a very fundamentalist
Right.
background. So my parents were and still are very religiously conservative. And so when we would go to the drugstore, that's where all the good magazines were. And I would go look for Starlog and Fangoria. And I was absolutely not supposed to be looking at those magazines. And so, I'd be reading,
Forbidden fruit.
yeah, totally forbidden fruit, especially
Yeah.
Fangoria. Good Lord. But I mean, I had such an appreciation for FX. Like I really love special effects. And you would see those articles in there where they weren't really about this exciting new movie. They were like, look at the amount of blood, look at the gore, look at the latex. It was, I was already dissecting things from a how did they do this perspective before the movies even came out. So those were kind of my gateways. Yeah.
Mhm.
What about you,
Well,
Karen?
yeah.
Any other printed matter you would cite?
Well, when I was really young, my father would bring me books on payday. So every week, every Friday, he'd bring me home a couple of books, and
Oh, wow.
usually some candy or lollies, as we would call it. So I'd always associate sugar and these books. But I would get kind of British books because there was at the time a real dearth of culture of white culture in Australia. And so we would really rely on America and the UK again for just any kind of culture, anything along the lines of what we're discussing. So my dad would bring me home Enid Blyton books. So they were just about kind of magic and folklore. And then when I got a little bit older, he started bringing home these books that I guess were a kind of book equivalent to In Search Of. And they were books from Target, of all places. And they just were about mysteries. And they would talk about ghosts and talk about cryptids and just strange people. I remember reading about a fellow called William Buckland. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him, but he was an English kind of scientist, early scientist, but he very famously ate a wide variety of animals, things like hedgehogs and frogs, and he liked eating buttered mice on toast and crocodiles and all these strange things. So I just really lapped this kind of stuff up. And Dad would also bring home comic books, but they were usually British comedy magazines and things like that. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Viz magazine at all.
No.
No.
It's still around apparently, and come to find out, it's more of an adult comic magazine. So a lot of kind of crude stuff in there, and toilet humor and black comedy, very surreal as well. But I grew up on that sort of stuff, and again, I think it kind of fanned the flames of my interest in all of these things.
Yeah. Anything you'd cite, Stephen?
Yeah, I had some of the same magazine experiences that
Yeah.
Blake had, just standing at the bookstore rack and looking at the magazines, but behind the scenes stuff was always quite fascinating to me as well.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was like a lot of the paperbacks I mentioned, so there were the ones that were like a compendium of stories about, for example, monsters, sea monsters, or or Bigfoot and the Yeti and so forth. And all these books would inevitably have a picture section right in the middle, which for a kid is great, right? So like even if you're having a hard time getting through the words, then you've got the pictures of UFOs or whatever. I think also too, like I certainly committed the sin of having the Donican books, the some other UFO books that were seemed more credible. uh, it's an interesting thing to say, but anyway, that those were a big part of my experience. Just having those around and flipping through them. I think I ever read one cover to cover. I would always just sort of like dive into some interesting part of it and read it.
Yep. I've talked before on on my show about Daniel Cohen. He had a book called The World's Greatest Monster, or excuse me, The Greatest Monsters in the World. And I've still got my copy. It's literally held together with duct tape at this point. Like it's just I read it and read it and read it. Exactly what you're describing. It's a scholastic book, so it's got a chunk of photos in the middle. But it covers like the Kraken, Nessie, Yetis, and Bigfoot. And Cohen turned out to be a super influential writer. I didn't realize how much he had impacted me. But going back into Monster Talk, when I go dig into certain monsters, like when did I learn about this? Oh my God, that was a Cohen book. That was a Cohen book. And he turns out not only was he a really great gateway writer into these topics, but he was also a founding member of PsyCop. So he was actually presenting this material from a skeptical perspective. It didn't come, I mean, I wasn't aware of it. He was, he was basically doing a really nice job of presenting the whole story, including skeptical takes, not telling you it's not real, keeping the mystery alive, but saying temper that with these facts, like maybe question these things, or how would that work in a biological sense? And so he was an extraordinarily influential writer for me, and I was really disappointed that we never got to interview him. I delayed. If I had any advice for you guys as podcasters or to listeners who are interested, don't wait to request somebody that you want to talk to. Get that interview in, because things happen. And in Daniel's case, he had a stroke, and I reached out to him about, I think it was 6 months after he'd lost the ability to speak.
Wow.
It broke my heart. So, and he's passed now, and I believe his wife has as well. But quite an interesting fellow, and I can't overstate how influential he was to me. So,
wow. Okay, so let's then step back a little bit and ask the big question. Why was all this weirdness such a big part of the 1970s? It was in documentaries, TV shows, books, including also like blockbuster movies at the time. So why the 70s?
you want to try that first, Karen? Or
Oh, I was hoping you would, and then
I'd be glad. Well,
off the
I have
back
a
of
lot of
that.
thoughts.
I mean, do you think that's an accurate assessment? Because y'all have looked at this stuff.
I think it is. It's a really good question. So I think what was happening is the rise of television. It had
Mm,
taken a while to mature, right?
Mhm.
So there were all these questions when it first started out was should we be using this to educate people, and ultimately we happen to live in a capitalist society, so ultimately what we really need to do is sell some soap. um and people didn't really know, or maybe the producers hadn't really figured out exactly what was going to be successful, what wasn't. And in the 1970s, it became pretty apparent. A few nascent sort of things happened at the same time. The rise of New Age culture, which
mm,
New Age is actually older than the 1970s, but in the 1970s, a lot of really particularly popular gurus and sort of ideas of thought came out. That's one thing that happened. And I think that influenced a lot of the people who worked in Hollywood and created in that space. Um, there was this new idea of like making specials around these topics. And we don't even say specials anymore. That doesn't really mean anything. But back when
Right.
we were growing up, 70s,
Mhm.
a special was a show that didn't fit into the regular schedule. It wasn't part of a series. It wasn't exactly a movie. It was like something different and it didn't appear in the regular scheduling. So it was a special. And there were some very popular specials that popped up in the 1970s, tied into monsters in particular. Um, Also, at that time period, you had Sun Classic Pictures was doing a lot of forewalling of these religious movies and monster movies. And there was also the insane success of The Legend of Boggy Creek. So that one was also it was produced independently and it was four-walled and it went on to make millions of dollars on thousands of dollars of filmmaking, right? So
Right. Right.
Yes.
that also had a big impact. So among all these things, and you always still had daytime TV. Like I think it's easy to forget that you had like the Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas shows in the daytime, Dinah Shore, all these,
Right.
they needed content as well. And so people who produce content related to alt medicine or UFOs or monsters, they frequently got brought onto these shows as guests or experts or something.
Mhm.
So when Landsberg came up with the idea for In Search Of, he was kind of cashing in on the idea that there's enough material out there that he could make a regular series out of it. And season one is very different from the subsequent seasons, I think, but they kind of get into their groove. And it's a documentary show, and they very carefully frame it in the terms that they're not showing you all the answers. They're showing you the ones the producers chose to include, right? Which I think is kind of fun. Um, so it was a new way to kind of get that material out, and I think it was extremely successful. And between that and the Those Amazing Animals, and That's
Ah, yes.
Incredible. Also, there was the Believe It or Not series with Jack Palance hosting.
Oh, right.
Um,
Yes.
there's sort of this whole new class of it's a mystery mongering show, as they would say at Psychop. Um, it's a show that's basically promoting the idea that these mysteries can't be explained. And frequently there would be an explanation already well known, but they would leave that out. And it just became a fun way to get people to talk around the water cooler or, to ask questions. So I feel like they were breaking a lot of ground in the 1970s, and it was not going to really change until you get to reality TV in the 2000s, right? So this idea of a balanced documentary, 90% believe, 10% skeptical. Um, and it felt very much like a regular PBS documentary, only about something
Mhm.
PBS would never cover. I feel like they had the model there.
Yeah.
Um, if we're just sticking to the 1970s, I think that's what was going on.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Any other ingredients you'd throw into the stew of the 1970s, Karen?
Well, again, growing up in Australia, and I saw the tail end of the 70s, and we had a lot of trickle down from the US and from the UK. And so growing up watching TV, often it was pretty boring. I turned on the TV on a Sunday morning hoping for cartoons, and instead it was Hour of Power and all this religious crap.
Oh, wow.
And Bonanza late at night. And so this was really new territory. And I think we were just eagerly taking anything that we'd get from the United States. And I think it was certainly very, very different, very novel, treating areas of interest, as Blake says. He's talking about kind of the self-help industry and new age industry. And even though that certainly goes back a lot further, 100 years or even more, I think that people were developing an interest in that. And, this isn't too close, it isn't too far away, rather, from the 60s and the hippies and just all the interest in that kind of thing. So I think it's really off the top of that too. But it was just something so different, so unique, so novel for that time. And everything else was just kind of variety TV shows and just syndicated shows. And so it was just really cool to see this kind of thing. And I think people were needing to see something like this. It was just so new and exciting and different. And we've had obviously so much since.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have done an episode on variety shows, but holy cow, that's a lost category these days. But yeah, they were ubiquitous. They were everywhere.
In some ways, it's really helped
everywhere
foster my fascination with how odd our pop culture was in our youth. But yeah, the variety shows are something else to behold. But I think it fits into what you were saying, right? The need to fill content and relatively inexpensive content, which is replaced later by reality TV.
Right.
Of course, it seems relevant, especially within the purview of your show, that the Patterson-Gimlin film is like the late 1960s, correct? Like 1967.
Yeah,
you get these images.
Very close.
When was the Loch Ness Monster supposed photo? I should know this, but I don't.
Well, there's quite a few of them. The surgeon photo is kind of the famous one that everybody points to. But
back to the 1930s with King Kong and
right, yeah. Very, very much so. And I think we lost Doc Shields maybe last year. I think there was a lot of really interesting hoaxers and creative types. And some of them, it's weird how much, it's kind of like when you look at those newspaper articles from the 1800s, where at the time they would have clearly known that what they were doing was a joke, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then modern readers come in and read it, and they're like, "Well, there was a pterodactyl here, or there a UFO crashed there." And I'm like, "No,
it was real then." Yeah,
no. Even back then, they knew it was BS, and they, it's just the BS part gets lost into history because readers read with the skills they have for the time they're in.
Context matters, right?
Yeah, it
Trust
really
the
does.
written word.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just listened to your 2-part episode about the exorcist effect.
Oh yeah,
that was quite fascinating. I kind of knew some of that stuff about people fainting and whatnot, but I was fascinated by the discussion because it really is another one of these 70s phenomenon. I do remember, again, I was too young to go see these movies, and I also came from a religious family. I don't think quite as strict as yours, but we weren't going to go see these movies at that point. But it's fascinating the way in which it sort of has this spillover effect into even religious practices, as you talked about in that episode.
Yeah, I am endlessly fascinated with the way that stories are transmitted and information is transmitted, and I'm working on an article right now, kind of sort of formalizing that. We've talked about it on the show. In the show, I think I made it up as a joke, but this idea of scripteds. It's cryptids, but they're tied into movie scripts or TV shows, and how that our fictional portrayals of these ideas feeds into how people literally report seeing them. And it's easy to kind of use the Yeti as an example,
right?
Where people had been telling Yeti stories for 1,000 years. I mean, they fit into Buddhist culture. They're very much a spiritual creature. They fit into this idea of lost and magical cities and all these ideas. And then in the 1950s, you get this sort of adventure-seeking neo-colonialist people coming out. They want to. The cryptozoology of that time is those myths are actually stories of real animals that have just been, magnified or changed or whatever. So we just need to go find out what's the truth at the bottom of it.
Mhm.
And there's this idea of what they call euhemerism, the idea that every myth is based on a seed of truth, right? And so all the cryptozoologists of that period are trying to strip off the mythological content and just get to the core biological reality, right? So, unfortunately, it turns out that these are not real animals usually. That they're stories about, whatever. And as we tell fictional stories like movies that show the Yeti on screen, they'll tend to make it white haired to make it, that would make sense for something to hide in the snow, right? Snow leopards are white. Well, clearly a Yeti would be white. But that's not actually how they were being reported before that. But after those sort of depictions show up, people start reporting them as white haired creatures. And I think similarly, the Patterson Gimlin film, Bigfoot had been depicted in lots of different ways. The stories had a lot of diversity in the way they were described. After the PGF becomes mainstreamed, everything kind of comports and conforms
Right.
to that visual. And Patterson was not coming at this from nowhere. He was basing his story on the story of William Rowe from Canada. So William Rowe spotted a female Yeti, or excuse me, a female Sasquatch, and has this whole story. And Gimlin, or excuse me, Patterson wrote a whole book about it and basically drew all of the monster just like it was supposed to look like from Rowe's story. And then when he goes out to make a movie about Bigfoot, on the first day out, he magically,
Yeah.
luckily, however you want to call it,
Surprise. Yeah.
captures a creature that looks exactly like the thing he drew. So, on
Hmm.
the one hand, you could say, guy wanting to make a movie about Bigfoot goes out and produces a sizzle reel. On the other hand, you could say, luckiest mofo in the entire universe goes out to film a Bigfoot movie and catches the perfect Bigfoot on the first day.
Hmm.
One of those is real. I don't know.
And then he looks like Andre the Giant in the $6 Million Man.
There you
Yeah.
go. There you go.
Yeah. Well,
So,
there are all these entrepreneurs of the weird at this time. So, in Patterson Gimlin, there's Uri Geller. He was a media fixture at the time. We mentioned talk shows that have to fill time, brought him on
yeah.
to bend some spoons and talk about the power of the mind with one eyebrow arched. Von Daniken was certainly a weirdness entrepreneur. Do you think that they were like surfing the wave of weirdness, or were they actually generating the wave of weirdness?
I think it's both. That's my take on it.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is a Darwinian aspect to this in the sense that people produce a lot of different ideas, and then the ones that work they tend to dump more energy into. So the more successful ideas will rise to the top entirely because all the effort goes there and the money comes out of there. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think that the whole ecosystem of ideas around monsters has a cash component, and I don't mean that to belittle it. I mean, as a podcasting entity, we also need money. Everybody needs money, but I think it's easy to say that mysteries sell better than solutions. So if you can keep
Mm.
the mystery going, it's more exciting, and people want that. I think I would imagine there are some really good history podcasts out there, but as soon as you try to like narrow down, here's why X happened, right? It's not as interesting as why did X happen? Here's five possibilities. Discuss amongst yourselves. Like those are more
Hmm.
engaging, right? So um, I think about this a lot because Karen and I both we need money to pay our bills. So our slavish devotion to trying to be fact-based has probably hurt us in the pocketbook, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah, we have been approached by producers so many times, and I think that we're just not giving them what they want.
No.
And we've done a lot of TV and interviews and things like that too, because there's always the need for that naysayer, for that cynic, that skeptic who just says no. But
Mhm.
certainly we're not the ones that are as successful. But I do think that there's a kind of cyclical element, maybe an elephant too, to a lot of these topics. So I think that UFOs just kind of come in and out of fashion, and psychics the same thing, and ghosts, that people have an interest in this and they think, oh yes, this has only been around for a little while. But no, I think everything old is new again, and a lot of these topics have been of interest for quite some time. We only pay attention to our own time. We're pretty egotistical.
Well, I want to say that's a mammoth
Yeah.
insight, and I don't want to truncate your.
Okay. I was hoping
there
for
it
a
is.
classic
I was
pun.
waiting
Fantastic.
for the pun.
Fantastic.
That's my fault. I left that wide open.
So, do you think that people are any more or less credulous now than in the 70s?
What do you think, Karen?
Boy, oh, that's a tough one. And we just look back into history and we think about, Barnum, and we think about the snake oil, and just medicine men, and going back further in time, and these soothsayers and oracles. I really think that this kind of thing's always been around, and there've always been a section of society who have believed, and a section of society who haven't, and who've challenged that. So I really think, again, it's everything old is new again. And I just know that any particular time has been more or less credulous. I think we have
Mhm.
more of an ability nowadays to be able to investigate things, and to do
Yeah.
research, and to have critical thinking minds. So it's a great time to be alive, and to be able to question these things. My son just turned 10, and I teach him a lot of critical thinking, and try to get him to research everything, not accept anything at face value. But I think that people being credulous and gullible, it's always
Mhm.
been around, and probably always will be, unfortunately. And we just need to fight against that. That's part of the human condition, to be superstitious and to believe in weird things.
Mhm.
I tell my kids that in the 21st century, ignorance is choice, and you shouldn't make that choice. Like you
Mm.
should, when possible, you should find out whether things are true or not. And there's a sort of tendency to do a query and trust the answer. And it's like critical thinking nowadays involves not just asking questions and trying to get to like the most evidence-based answer, but also pushing past the first search results. Because if you ask a search engine, it's driven by commerce, not by the need for facts. And so
Yeah.
you've got to like try to find the solutions that are actually grounded in reality, and
Mhm.
that's it's a little
Dig
more
deeper.
work. It's a little more
Mhm.
work.
And
So
AI makes it all the more complicated.
it
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, helping people get to the point that we all reached, where we said, well, we thought it would be fun if there were ghosts or sea monsters
Sure.
or whatever, but
Yeah.
we said, not so much. Do I believe this anymore?
Mhm.
And I don't know how you get people, or if you can identify when somebody's ready to make that step.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know one thing that has changed when we first started doing podcasting, we were very much in the is this true or not, right?
Mhm.
Kind of mentality. And that's a very finite number of episodes, right? Like, but the breadth and scope of human experience and the way that people tell stories and what these stories mean to them is
Mhm.
much deeper and richer than just that simple binary approach. So we've tried to kind of get to look, these things may not be true, but they may be important, right? So
Right.
sometimes the stories people tell bring them tremendous meaning. They give their
Mhm.
lives meaning. And I don't want to make the world a less interesting place just by asking these questions. I think there's a beauty in some of these stories, even if they're not true. And it's really more about I would like to reduce the amount of fear people have. I think people are scared of things and concerned about things that sometimes are not worth being scared of. And so I'm hoping that when we do our show that we could teach people how to use critical thinking to reduce uncertainty and reduce fear.
Mhm.
And if we use those skills in the realm of monsters, they could probably bring that set of tools across other parts of their life. So, as I like to say, many a mind has been sharpened on the whetstone of Bigfoot, right? Like you can use Bigfoot as a way to learn critical thinking and still enjoy Bigfoot. Like it doesn't matter if
Right.
Bigfoot's not real. It's this powerful, very visceral thing that people experience. And even if you don't call it Bigfoot, people have experienced monsters and hairy men on the fringes of society, on the fringes of civilization for as long as people have been recording history. So, is it a real thing? I don't think so. Is it an important thing? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, as Karen was saying, that there's a phenomenon there. People are having experiences. And I like what you say in the podcast about the presumption of sincerity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
people are experiencing something, and that phenomenon in and of itself is worth looking into.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for the most part, I think rarely do we really encounter a hoax. More often,
No,
it's
that's true. That's true. I mean, there are a few out there, but yeah, a lot of these people are just. And how could they all be mistaken? Well, it turns out it's super easy to be mistaken, right? It really is. And being mistaken is not the same as perpetrating a fraud, right? It just
yeah.
isn't.
Right.
So, yeah, that I think that matters a lot. That
Mhm.
framework of presumed innocence or presumed sincerity, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've, of course, have been, been blessed with the long view of all of this from the 70s until the modern day. Is there any one of these areas of weirdness that you've seen that's really changed over time? Like the
Ooh,
like
that's
the
a good
Bigfoot
question.
followers or UFO people or anything
Um,
else?
I would say the rise of Dogman is probably so Dogman is an upright humanoid canid that people have been reporting since the very late 1980s. Um, I think Dogman represents the death of authentic biological possibility for cryptids. Um, I don't want to say that cryptozoology as it used to be with the pelts and paws sort of approach is dead, but when you have to incorporate ideas like Dogman, something that definitely does not fit into a sort of natural selection Darwinian view,
Hmm.
it's an upright humanoid canid. It's basically a wolf man, and its origins lie in a pretty obvious Halloween prank. Uh, but it's taken extraordinarily seriously, and it's kind of the way that uh, Slender Man and a few other cryptids who had very clear origins in fiction have sort of bled into the real world, the real experiences that people have. Um, I think it says more about people than it does about
Oh,
monsters. That
okay.
people have an openness to possibilities that are far more giving than biological reality would allow, right? So there's just no such thing as a human-sized upright canid. That's not a real thing.
Right.
So as people are reporting that, we have to account for it somehow. And in my mind, it represents how that our perspectives and our perceptions are influenced by the sort of story templates that we load it with. You
Mhm.
know, if you've only read stories about a world where you're limited by biology, then you're not gonna. I don't know what you would do with a dog man. But if you've read lots of fiction and horror, Dogman fits right in there. It looks like an upright werewolf. It looks like a halfway to wolf transformation. So it fits right into there. It fits into a magical worldview in a way that Bigfoot, you could say it's an ape, but you can't say that about Dogman. Dogman, it has to be some sort of weird fantasy creature. It just doesn't fit into any
Mhm.
biological framework.
Yeah.
So it's intriguing. It makes more sense when you think of it in terms of narrative contagion than it does of biological potential for reality. So
Okay. Karen, do you have any thoughts on aspects of the weird that have changed significantly since the 70s?
Well, I think I'll go with my favorite topic again, ghosts, ghost hunting. And I think we've really watched that change a lot over the decades and
true.
over the past century. And where initially a lot of these stories were about, I guess, storytelling, oral history, folklore. And nowadays, with improved and changing technology and television, obviously, it ghost hunting and researching this kind of thing has really changed. And people use a lot of technology that was not designed for the purposes of ghost hunting for ghost hunting. So devices like EMF readers and cameras and FLIR cameras, Geiger counters, all kinds of crazy stuff. And now that we have this kind of, I guess, life imitating art where we have um, dozens of groups across cities where people are going out and ghost hunting and using all the equipment that they see people use on television. So I think that that's something that has really changed a lot since the 70s and the 80s and been influenced by television.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Well, we're running up into the time limit here. I want to ask one giant question then, of course, to sandwich in here at the very end. But I've got a smaller question too after that. So, do you think the legacy of this period on balance is good or bad? And feel free to define good or bad however you want.
Hmm.
That's tough.
It certainly entertained me growing up, and I know that it's allowed Kieran and I to bond over our love of things we don't believe in. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I can't think of there being a lot of harm, at least from that 1970 slice of it.
Hmm.
By the time you get to the 2020s, you get things like QAnon, which probably couldn't exist without this sort of pre-work in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I don't think of the 70s as being inherently harmful per se. Yeah. So
Okay.
no.
Mhm.
Karen,
Yeah,
what do you
I
think?
think like Blake says, nothing's really black and white. I think you've got a
Hmm.
mix of good and bad, and it's really just a matter of what we take away from these things, and how we what we do with it, how we educate other people. So Blake and I have had the privilege of interacting either directly or indirectly with tens of thousands of people,
Hmm.
millions actually, in terms of downloads over the years, and we've been very fortunate to get our perspectives across and to hear a lot from people who listen to the show too. So we're really in a unique position in that regard. And I think for myself and for Blake too, that we've taken away the good and we try to expose the bad.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
What
we
do you think?
occasionally get listeners who really hate our skepticism, but the vast majority are able, I think, push past that and recognize that even when we don't believe in a thing, we wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't a beloved, entity, memory, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we
Hmm.
love this stuff. Like, I think you can have a deep appreciation for stuff without necessarily believing in it. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, what's your take on the legacy here?
So yeah, I think the QAnon thing came to mind, but it was also was mentioned in that Exorcist episode that y'all did. I think you could talk about things like the Satanic Panic were not positive from the
Mm.
70s that kind of sprung forth from some of these some of the reaction to some of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Good
But
example.
yeah, there also quite a bit that's just fun. Sasquatch is fun. Bigfoot's fun, right? Um, and so some of the stuff is like anything. I think I appreciate really the perspective that Blake and Karen have, which is you can love the thing if you don't believe in the thing or can't prove the thing exists. And as I said earlier, appreciate the approach of critical thinking. That's something that really we need very much of in this world. People
Yeah.
be willing to come to questions and ask real questions and want real answers and not just answers that make them happy in the moment.
Yeah.
So, I think the things to learn from all these things, and there's fun to be had as well. So,
Yeah, I'll throw in my 2 cents. I think any legacy is a mixture of things, as Karen said, and I think on the good side, I just watched Close Encounters again, and the sense of awe and mystery about the universe that Steve Spielberg really captures in that movie is also energizing a lot of the interest that people had in things like UFOs and sea monsters and so forth. And in that sense, if even if like you come out to the cliff of disappointment, where you find out that things aren't real, but you say, hey, the natural world is a fascinating place. By the way,
that's
did
right.
you know that elephants can communicate subsonically over miles? And there's lots of other interesting things about the world that are worth investigating. That's a good legacy, I think, if
Right.
nothing else. All right. So our signature question, which I will say was inspired by you having a signature question at the end of every episode of your podcast. Ours is, what merch item that you had from this period was most treasured, and was there any merch that you wish you'd had? And merch is, again, a very broad category. That could be t-shirts, it could be anything that's a talisman of what you enjoyed about this. So Karen, how about you? Was there any merch that you would cite?
Oh, I don't think anything necessarily from the 70s, but I guess more 80s and 90s. And it's tangential, true, but it's merch anyway. I had
Mm.
Paul McCartney's autograph, and I don't know what happened to it. I just in moving and traveling, moving overseas, I lost that. So I hoping I can track that down again
Oh my
someday.
God.
And then years ago, my brother was traveling. He was working in England, and he was traveling from New York to London, and he met Stephen Fry, was seated near him, and got his autograph and for me. And he and I are since estranged, and I never received it. So somewhere out
Oh,
there,
Uh,
Stephen Fry signed a napkin on a British Airways flight for me, and I want to get it back.
All right. What about you, Blake?
well, I remember, despite my parents being pretty conservative, for some reason, one Christmas they got me the Micronauts Battle Cruiser, which may have been the greatest toy that I ever owned as a
it's a
kid.
great toy. That was
It
a
was
great toy.
is this was before safety features would stop you from shooting eye popping missiles out. Like there was little micro missile launchers and
Yes,
big pistol missile launchers, and they were all substantial and dangerous.
some great
I
springs
love.
on those things.
Yeah, seriously, I learned a lot about what not to shoot with those things. They were great. That and I had two more. I had a Tiger Man action figure from Buck Rogers that I lost in a mud puddle and never was able to find. I went back with a metal detector and all kinds of things trying to find this guy. I never could find him. And then when eBay became a thing, one of the first things I bought on eBay was a replacement for my Tiger Man. Love that. And the other one was from Battlestar Galactica. The little guy who was sort of a Cylon. His name was Lucifer, which would, of course, made him a forbidden toy. But I managed to get him, and his head had a blue plastic dome with glitter inside. I just loved that mini. I loved it so much, and I don't know where it went. I've got, I was poor, so we had a lot of Star Wars
Hmm.
toys. But my relatives would like, he likes those Star Wars toys, So they'd buy the cheap Chinese knockoffs. They weren't Star Wars. They were like Space
Oh, no.
Battle, and they weren't right. They were really not right. But I really loved those things. And I Lucifer from Battlestar Galactica and Tiger Man from Buck Rogers.
Maybe a
And
Lucifer is hanging out with Paul McCartney's autograph somewhere.
could totally be true.
Maybe he
Somewhere,
stole
yeah.
Paul
So,
McCartney's
yeah.
On another
autograph.
plane. Yeah.
All right. What about you, Stephen?
Oh yeah, I mean, I didn't have any monster memorabilia that I can think of. I would have liked Sasquatch stuff that I didn't have. I did very much want. I had the Steve Austin, the big action figure, but I wanted the Sasquatch one, which I never did get. So I'll put that down.
Hard to get. But even back
Yeah.
then, those were hard to
Yeah,
get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
I
didn't
did-
have the Oscar briefcase either,
The
did
Astra
you?
Gold, that was pretty. Yeah, I didn't have that one either. I did have a lot of Micronauts, and I did have that battle cruiser, and it rocked.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So what I had, I'll cite, was there was a series of toys that were like action figures of aliens from different planets in our solar system. Each one kind of matched what the planet was about. So there was one for like Jupiter that was this really heavy reptilian guy. And anyway, I had most of those, and I had a really, really bad case of the flu. And I remember my mom went out and found the toy distributor and got the one action figure from this series that I didn't have, that wasn't available in any of the stores where she had sought it out. So that's a fond memory of things alien from my childhood that I treasured. The one I wish I had. You guys really convinced me that the Usborne books rock.
They do. They really do.
I found examples from them, and they're just great.
That's
Yeah,
a good point. Yeah, you can get a lot of these books reprints nowadays because they were so popular back then.
Yeah.
I'm finding them more and more, and I have secured copies myself. So, yeah, that's a good example.
All right. Well, it's been a delight having you here on the podcast. Thank you
Yes, it
so
has.
much. And
Oh,
and
thank
you're
you.
our
It's
first
just
guest,
fun.
so
Oh,
so glad to have you.
we're honored
Thanks
to
for
be
getting
the
us before we
inaugural guest.
died.
I was thinking you were looking a little
Yeah,
peaked there,
a little
Blake. So
peaky. Yeah.
It's like, I feel so old, but yeah, no, this is I've really enjoyed sort of figuring out what I was fascinated by back then and
Mhm.
why, and thanks to eBay, scratching that nostalgia itch by occasionally picking up this, that, or the other. But Tiger Man was a big one. Tiger Man, man, I'm so glad I've got my Tiger Man behind me over here in a bowl. It's like I hardly ever have my friends over to play Battlestar Galactica or Buck Rogers, but we could.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
well, you're talking to a big Micronauts fan, and Steven.
there you go. Yeah.
oh yeah, the Micronauts were
Yeah.
great. I don't have mine anymore, unfortunately, but they were great.
Very, very weird comic, but
The comic was good too. I really liked the comic, but yeah, the toys were fantastic.
the toys were fantastic. So
And anything you could reconfigure, I liked. There's a big
and
Lego
they were
guy,
so
too.
articulated. They were
Yes.
really, 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 really articulated. And, well, so
were.
is Tiger Man. They kind of stick out. The Star Wars are very rigid.
Yes, exactly.
But
With the lightsaber in the arm.
yeah, exactly. So, but
Oh, yes.
play is important, and
It is.
it's
Yeah.
just those toys. I think watching shows like The Toys That Made Us and kind of learning the backstory
Yes.
behind these things is really interesting. So we didn't talk about it, but Scooby Doo was also
Oh,
a big
yeah.
influence. I think
Oh,
on
yeah.
Kieran and my
Yeah.
Thank you for
well.
bringing
I
that
can
up.
see
Good
that.
point.
Yeah.
So that's back in the 70s. It was almost always the real estate guy who was really behind it, but
And they would have gotten away with it too, whoever you met.
exactly. It turns out
Yeah.
that crazy real estate people never caused any more harm. So it was just a little period in the 70s.
That's right.
Just
So-
then, yeah.
Just briefly.
Right. Yeah. So your podcast is basically about being meddlesome kids.
Yeah,
ripping the mask
it really
off.
is.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is. So
Big kids.
live
Yeah.
it. There's probably no more important LARPing that we do than to be the Scooby Gang. That's really, they were skeptical, but they were open to the possibility that this was real. So, and also they had great pizza and sandwiches. So it's really,
Okay.
And they met Batman.
they certainly
Hmm.
did.
So there's that.
And Jerry, what's his name? Jerry Reed. Pretty Mary, Sunshine. Man, I hated this crossover episode.
Although the callback from Godzuki was Scrappy Doo.
That's
Yeah.
right. No, for real. Yeah.
There was that whole era of insulting children by having to have dumb little sidekicks.
Is it Scrappy Kaiju? Yeah, exactly. Same thing.
Oh, good one.
Well,
All
thanks
right,
for having us. That
Thanks
was
for
really
being
fun.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a great idea for a podcast. Definitely a new angle.
Well, we enjoy it.
We do indeed.
Cool.
Just as the weird decade of the 70s came to a close, so too has this episode of Ancient Geeks has come to its close. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell a friend. We're always grateful for a review too on the podcast service of your choice. If you want to contact us directly, you can find us at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. And you can also look for us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. All content copyright 2025, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. And once again, thanks to our guests, Blake Smith and Karen Stolzno, for a terrific conversation. We'll see you next time.